Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, pick up where we left off last week. This will be verse 15. As always, it's an honor and privilege to be in the house of the Lord, to gather together in His presence and study this Word with our brothers and sisters. And, He's given us a beautiful day this morning. It's a little cool, but, He woke us up and we were able to get out of bed and come in here, so we need to praise Him for that for sure, give Him glory. And again, we'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we start in verse 15. So last week, we went through about all the time to be born, time to die, all those things, and we're talking about how everything has its time and place, all the purposes of going through life and things and God's plan. So we're going to continue on with that this morning, but everything that happens, everything we go through, it's part of His plan. It's part of life. It's part of growing closer to Him. And, when we cling to Him and we stick with Him, He's going to carry us through these things. We're going to see through, and He'll see us through. He'll give us strength. He'll protect us or shield us, whatever it may be. He'll comfort us and bring us through when we cling to Him. But we have to keep Him at the center of everything. He has to be first. That's the first commandment He gave. That there be no other gods before Him. He has to be first. And when we keep Him there, He'll see us through all these things. Again, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 15. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. So, God's always been, always will be. Time doesn't really matter to Him. Time's really just a man thing because, we're born and our time starts and then we die and, our soul goes to its destination. And some people believe that once we die, that's it. But no, we're going one place or the other. It's going to be to heaven with the Lord, or we're going to go to hell because of we rejected Jesus Christ. Because we have a beginning, but God has no beginning. He has no end. He always is, always was. So time is not a thing to Him. And He's always been in control. But, that's speaking on that, there's a time for everything. And we have to understand that we're going somewhere. When this body gives out and our soul's set free, it's going to go back to meet the Lord. And when we meet Him, there's going to be a judgment there going on. Verse 16. And moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. So, we're going to judgment. Where we stood when we took that last breath is going to be where we go in judgment. That's going to depend on what happens there. If we lived wickedly, we rejected the Lord, and we were in rebellion, we never had that relationship with Jesus Christ, we're going to be judged against that. And we're going to be sent away to a bad place because of the choices we made. A lot of people want to blame God and say, well, why would He send me there? Why would He do this? Whatever. It's not on Him, it's on us. He gave us a choice. We have to all make that decision, and that falls squarely upon each and every one individual. We have to make that decision on our own. Mommy and Daddy can't make it for us, our kids, whoever it is, Grandma, Grandpa, they can't make that decision for us. That's a personal decision we have to make, and a personal relationship we have to have with Jesus Christ if we want to make it. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. So, when we stand before Him, those books will be opened up. And they're going to look and see if our name's in that Lamb's book alive because we accepted Jesus Christ and was washed in that blood and saved. And then we tried to do our best to live for Him. It doesn't mean that we're perfect, but it means that we tried. We strove to fight against the sin, to leave all that old life behind and to move forward and to be more like Christ. If our name's not in that book, we're going to be rejected and we're going to be charged with all the things that we've done. And so, everybody's going to stand there in that judgment. And, it's a terrifying thing. It sends chills through my body to think that you'd stand there without Christ. Without knowing Him, without having that relationship, without having Him to say, yeah, I knew you. You did the best you could. Welcome on in, come in. As opposed to like, well, yeah, you're saying you did this, and this, but I never knew you. Depart from me. And that's the two verdicts you're going to get. Either you knew Him and you served Him, you worshiped the Father and you did your best for them, I said, or you rejected it and lived your own life, and you condemned your own self. There's no other way. There's no time out. There's no middle ground where you can go try to work things out and fix a few things that some people believe that, and you see that in movies and stuff, like, well, you were good but not quite good enough, but you wasn't bad enough to send to hell, but we'll send you back and let you try to work a few things out. That's garbage. It's not true. Where you stand when you draw that last breath is where you'll be. So you're either with him, you're under the blood and you're serving him, being obedient, or you're in rebellion, lost and broken in the world, and there's no in between. There's no time out. When you stand before him, you're going to be judged for where you stood. Verse 18, I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. So he's saying here, that man, we like to think we've evolved and we've become so much further and we're better off, but in our natural fleshly state, without God, we're just like the animals out in the wild. We're running to the lusts and desires of our heart. We're just following whatever the impulses that go through us are. When we're not thinking about things, if we're hungry, we go eat, and we eat till we're full. If there's somebody in our way or something, we just run over, just like the animals. We'd be wild without the Spirit. Without the Spirit leading us, without turning to God and seeing that, that we're not really better than animals when we're lost. For what that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts, even one thing befalleth them, as the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. So, everybody has their time when they're going to pass away, they're going to die. Death's coming for each and every one of us. We don't know when that is. Some people, these poor children out there, some of them never make it out of the wombs. And that's a sad thing that happens. And some people, die as young children. Some people die as teenagers. Some people die when they're, up in their 90s. Some people make 100. We never know what time our clock is ticking. But everybody's clock is ticking. So we need to make sure that we're seeking out the Lord and finding Him as soon as we can and not putting it off, because we just never know. Because that is the one thing that's going to separate us, is that from the animals, that we do have a soul. And then there is a battle for that soul. Satan's out there, like a Roman lion, trying to seek and devour and destroy anybody that he can. And, Christ is still out there, and He's seeking as a shepherd to find the lost sheep, to bring them in and save them and to give them life. And we have to make that choice, and we have to seek and find out which master we're going to serve. We're going to serve this world and Satan and do the fleshly things, or we're going to serve Jesus and we're going to serve His Father, and we're going to do the spiritual things, and we're going to look for the good things and find life. That's on us. But that is what separates us, is that we have a soul, and there's a battle over that soul. And you fight that each and every day. You have to get up. Today is the day of salvation. You get up every morning and think, I'm going to serve the Lord today. I'm going to do my best for Him. And you have to keep going and keep moving. It is a marathon. It's a race. And it's a constant thing. It's not a one-time thing you do and then you're done and squared away. You got to keep seeking Him and obeying and serving and working for Him and doing the best that you can. Because you were bought with a terrible price. Christ gave up His very flesh and blood. They broke His body and drained Him of blood on that cross for us, to save each and every one of us. Now we owe Him. And we need to serve Him and do the best that we can to help others. We're not ours anymore. We were purchased with that price. Christ purchased each and every one of us, and we need to pay Him back as best we can, which we never could, because He paid a price that none of us could do. We could never earn it. We could never pay Him back fully, but with our obedience and our service to Him, that'll be enough. That He'll accept us. When we're obedient, we serve Him, but we have to do that. We can't live in rebellion. We can't live in sin. All go unto one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. So that our body, our fleshly body, will go back to the earth. It'll go back to the dust it came from, the animals, us, everything, all that. But again, like I said, we have a spirit, we have a soul, and that soul is going to go to one place or the other. There's two places to go. There's heaven or hell. And like I said, the way we live our lives, If we're covered in that blood, we repent and we're saved and we're serving Him, we'll go to a good place. We'll be with Him. We'll be in His presence forever in heaven, and all the worries and strife and troubles will be over. Whatever we've suffered here on this earth, it'll be gone. But if we go to the other direction because we lived in rebellion and rejected Christ, it'll just be the beginning of suffering and sorrow. As bad as this world has been, and as much as you've been through, and the pain that you've went through, and all the torments and whatever it is here, it's going to be nothing but a drop in the ocean to what the torment will be if you go the other direction. Because it's just unimaginable how bad that's going to be, and be separated from God, to never have that peace, that love, that feel the Spirit move upon you again. It would be such a horrible thing to think about the other direction that we could go. But we have to make that choice each and every day, every hour, every minute. We have to choose who we're going to serve. Is it going to be our own lusts and enticements in this flesh, or are we going to serve the Lord? Verse 21. Who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? So again, we have to make that choice. This is looking at that. Like if we live as animals and we're wild and we reject, then our spirit's going to be crushed and we're going to be cast away. But if we're obedient, we walk with Him, it's going to take us up. We're going to meet Him, and He's going to accept us, and we'll be accepted in. Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So, what we've got in this life, if we don't have Christ, all that we have to look for is like what we can build up, what we can amass here, what we can do, and what kind of legacy we can leave here on this world, but we're going to leave it here. All the earthly things, the money, the treasures, the houses, the cars, the toys, whatever it may be we build up, all that stuff we're going to leave here. And somebody will fight for it, or if we have a will, they'll get this and that, whatever it may be, it'll all be divided up. But the important thing that we can do is what spiritual legacy that we leave here, because that's going to be what's important. If we lived a life serving Christ, following God, being obedient to Him and His Word, and trying to tell everybody about Jesus Christ and tell them to serve this wonderful God that we live in, and maybe we help somebody, we encouraged them, and we pointed them to Jesus that He could save them. That's the kind of legacy we can leave. It's a spiritual thing, and that's going to matter more than anything, because that'll last. The work you've done for Him and the obedience you've done, when He's asked you to do things and you're being obedient and you work for Him, that's gonna last. That's gonna be an eternal thing. Everybody that you've shared the gospel with, that you've pointed towards Jesus Christ so that He could save them, that's gonna be something that's gonna matter and gonna last. When you get up there, maybe there's gonna be a time where you're gonna see people and they're gonna be like, hey, remember when you told me about Jesus? It's like, you pointed me to Him and He saved me, and that's why I'm here. That's going to be a wonderful thing to think about, that you're going to be able to hear these stories. And it may be somebody you never even talked to. It's maybe somebody you worked with, or somebody that saw you and they saw the way you lived and the way you talked to other people and the way you treated somebody like that, or you smiled at them, or whatever it may have been. That could make all the world of difference. The way God works is such a mysterious and powerful thing. Those little bitty things that, sometimes you get that churning in your pit of your stomach to just go do something. You're like, well, what would that matter? Why would that make a difference at all? We don't have to understand all that stuff. We just have to be obedient to walk up and do that. Because the tiniest little thing might be planting a seed. The tiniest little thing may put a little water on a seed somebody else has planted. And then God can take that and He can give the increase, because it's all about Him and His honor and His glory. We're just the tools to work. If we will work, if we'll bring ourselves, humble ourselves down to be obedient to Him, He can do great things. And we have to make sure that we remember that it is about Him and it's not us. Going on, chapter 4. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. So, when we look on this world, we got to think about, Ecclesiastes was probably written, 3,000-4,000 years ago. I'm not sure myself, but it's been thousands of years ago. This was before Christ's time, so we know it was over 2,000 years ago, but this sounds just like this world today. We look out and we think about all the troubles and trials we've had since we were children growing up and adults, and then we look at the news and we see our cities and towns and things going on with the crime and the cost of living going up and this and that and all the sin that's running rampant. There's a lot of things, and there's so much sadness and oppression and all these things that are going on. It's like this was in his time, this was in time now. This word is such a deep and powerful thing that it crosses through generations, and it's timeless. It's perfect, and it applies just as much now, and it's just as relevant now as it was when it was written. And so we look at these things and we see all the oppression and the tears and the sadness, and it seems like there's no comfort, there's no peace, there's no hope. And in this world, there is no peace. There is no comfort in this world. All these things are temporary. If we're going to find peace, if we're going to find comfort, we're going to find deliverance, it's going to be through Christ. It's going to be God. It's going to be His Spirit. That's the only comfort and joy we're ever going to have, and that's what's going to carry us through. Wherefore, I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. And he's saying, that the people that have done passed on and gone on, he goes, their suffering's over if they've known the Lord, of course. It's just beginning if they didn't. But he's saying, that it's better to be, gone on than to be here sometimes. The author's saying here that was writing this, that living is hard. And we should weep for those when they're born, and we should be, we should have joy and peace and happiness for those when they pass, especially if we know where they're going. That's going back to that, that it's because we know when children are born, we normally celebrate, and then we weep when people pass. But, if we know that they're spiritual and that they were saved and they were in God's will, it should be the other way around, because when children are born, their suffering's just starting. They're going to have to live their life and go through all the things we went through. But then again, if we know those that have passed on and went on, and we knew they knew the Lord, then they're home. They're in peace. They're with Him now. They're celebrating. So it is that, funny thing that to think about, when you look at worldly and you look at spiritually, it's always opposites. There's mirror image opposites. Daylight and dark. It actually is daylight and dark, because sin is darkness, and God is light. Yea, better is He than both they which have not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. And he's saying, that once you're born and you live a little bit, you have a little bit of life, a few years under, you see how evil this world really is, how much darkness and sin and all the evil that's present here, and the suffering that happens because people reject God and they live in their own way and they take advantage of each other, they hurt each other, people use people to get things that they want, and it is such a sad thing. Again, I consider all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. So, he sees all this stuff and this striving and this struggles and how everybody's fighting amongst themselves, and there's division, and somebody might work for something and then somebody's envious of them and their neighbor because they got a little bigger house, or they put a pool in, or they got a new vehicle, whatever it may be, all that stuff. And he said, this is not the way we should be. This is not the way we should live. We're living just like as animals, like it said back up at the end of chapter 3 there. It's like, that's not what we're supposed to be. That's not who we are. We need to be, living, that there's a future here, that there's a hope in Christ for us, and stop getting caught up in all these worldly things and fussing and fighting and struggling with each other, and help each other. We're supposed to love each other. We're not supposed to divide each other. If we see somebody that's a little different than us, they talk a little different, they look a little different, they dress a little different, that's okay. That's who they are. We need to love them. We need to share the truth with them. And we can get together and come together in Christ, because Christ can unite all of us together. Because in Him, there is no difference. We all come together, and once you go through Him, we're all going to be the same through Him. We're all going to be covered in that blood. And so we need to stop the struggles and the fighting and the division among us, and come together in Him as one. Because if you're going to make it to heaven, you're going to go through the cross. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you look like, how you dress, whatever it is, you're going to have to come through Him, or you're not going to make it. The fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. So it's saying there again, it's like those that are They come together, they fight, they take advantage of those that are around them, their family, their friends, their people around them. It's like you're basically cutting your own throat when you try not to get along with people or you use people, you take advantage of them. You're destroying yourself because you're destroying what's around you. That you're destroying your support system. You're destroying the people that's supposed to be helping you and helping you make it. Because we're supposed to love each other, lift each other up, strengthen each other, not weaken each other, not step on each other to try to get up another rung on that ladder that we're climbing to success in this world. That's not what we're supposed to do, because you cut your own throat doing that. We need to help each other. Help each other all make it along. Verse 6. Better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. When you think about that, I'm like, well, what does that really mean? Well, it means I'd rather have just a little bit and just enough to get by and have peace in the Lord than to have more than both my hands could carry and have more than enough to make it and to survive in life, but not have any peace and be miserable doing it. You got to think about that, because you see all these people that get rich and famous and they've got enough money that they could buy or do or go and do whatever it is that they want, but they're sad and they're trying to find a void. They're trying to fill that void in their life, and they look for relationships. They look for drugs and alcohol. They look for more power and more money and more houses and to go on bigger, better trips and all these things, and none of that ever fills that void. Because they're never satisfied. Because they've not understood that fact that if you have a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and food in your belly, and you have the Lord, you've got enough. You don't have to have a 60-room mansion. You don't have to have 75 cars. You don't have to have a reputation and a name that everybody in the world knows who you are. Because all that stuff is vanity. It's vexation of the spirit. It's none of that matters, because it's all worldly, earthly things. So, to have the Lord, to know Him, you can have peace and have just very little, because you've got everything you need in the Lord. And if you can have everything in this world, all the money, the power, the fame, and all that stuff, and not have Him, and you're going to be sad and miserable, because that void is still empty in your heart. Because there's only one thing that can fill that, and it's God. It's His Son, Jesus Christ. That precious blood of Jesus Christ is all that's going to make you whole. And then that's what He's saying here, that it's better to have just a little bit and have the Lord than have everything and not have Him. Because if you don't have Him, you have nothing. If you have Him, you have everything. That's all you're ever going to need. Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Neither saith he, for whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. So again, he's saying here that, he knew a guy, or whatever it may have been here, that worked and worked and worked and hoarded all this labor that he did, and he was never satisfied with all that he amassed, all that he collected together, all the stuff that he had, and he worked and worked and worked, and to the point where it seemed like he was alone. He didn't have a wife or spouse. He didn't have children, none of that stuff. He didn't have time for that. All he was doing was working and gathering all this stuff together, and he was miserable and sad. He never ever had enough. The first $1 million wasn't enough. The second wasn't enough. The $12th million wasn't enough. Whatever it may have been, in the story, it's like, because there's that hole, there's that void in your soul. And it's like the world can never fill that. The world can never fill that hole that's in your soul and in your heart. It's only Jesus Christ. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. And also, that means we're not supposed to walk this alone. We're supposed to have people in our lives to help us make it, to help us make us through. Because, if going on, it'll explain that here. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth. For he hath not another to help him up. So again, there's all these people like, I don't need anybody. I can make it on my own. Everybody's always let me down. That mentality in the world, like I'm just going to be a loner and I'm going to walk alone and do all these things on my own. Well, it's not wise to do that because, you're going to get sick. You're going to get weak. You're going to have a bad day. And, maybe you trip and fall. Well, if you're walking with someone on this journey, they can help you up. We're supposed to support each other. We're supposed to love each other. I talked a little about that earlier, but, we're supposed to be there and take care of each other. God made us to be social beings. We were supposed to be around each other. We were supposed to be communities. We were supposed to love each other and help each other in the hard times and share what we have with our brothers and sisters and those around us. We're supposed to help each other make it. And we have to do that. We have to understand that nobody can do this alone. We got to support each other. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat, but how can one be warm alone? So again, there's two. There's going to be times when the cold comes, and life beats you down. The fire that burns in your soul, it may get just a little bit slow. It may get a little bit cold. If you can't keep enough coal on the fire or enough wood on the fire, it's going to burn down and get low. But when there's two people together, it makes it a little bit easier there. You got help. You got somebody to support you, to encourage you when you're weak. When you're tired, they can bear the brunt of the load. And then, when you get back to strength, and you can let them rest, and then, you can carry the brunt. And then when you both get back together there, you can carry the load together and share that. We're not supposed to be meant to be alone. There's somebody out there. We're supposed to be working with those people and doing these things together and having these relationships to move forward and do this. But of course, it always has to be God-centered. It can't be of this world. We don't want to be unevenly yoked, of course, but going on. It's just we need support, and nobody needs to think they can do it on their own. You hear people talk about that all the time too. Like, well, I don't have to go to church to be saved. I can worship God right here in my house, and I can pray and read my Bible at home. And I don't disagree with that. That you can be at home, you can pray, you can worship God at your house, in your backyard, at Walmart, wherever it may be. We have that right and privilege of being children of God to do that. But it also says, don't forsake assembling together of yourselves together, as some do. So we need to come together. It talks about over and over, everywhere throughout the Bible, about supporting each other, helping each other. Well, we can't do that if we stand alone. We have to come together. So, and it's just, I said, it's the word again. We're supposed to be there, help each other, strengthen each other, bring each other together. And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So again, two, if you're in a fight and you're one-on-one with somebody, that's not the same kind of odds you're going to get if you have a friend helping you and it's 2-on-1 or 3-on-1. And this world is out there to crush each and every one of us. It's going to trick us. It's going to fool us. It's going to try to separate us from the flock. The wolves love to try to get a lamb or a sheep or whatever away from the flock by itself because it's easier to attack and to destroy. If we stand together as one and stay together, and then especially when we stay under the shelter of the shepherd and under his view, the wolves don't like that. They're more afraid of that because that's the way this world is. It wants to get you separated and alone. And when we stand with each other, we support each other, we help each other up. Somebody stumbles and falls, we don't kick them while they're down and keep them down there. We help them pick them up, point them back in the right direction and help them and love them. We need to remember that and understand. And of course, it goes on about that threefold cord. If you take 3 ropes together and weave them together and make them one, that's going to be, threefold stronger than it was before. It's going to be harder to break. Well, when we stand together, and we're not divided amongst ourselves. We're not arguing amongst ourselves, but we're all said, you know what? This is the word. This is the truth. This settles all the arguments that we have because the word is from the one that cannot lie, cannot be, because is infallible and can't fail, can't make mistakes. And we accept this word, we can come together as one. And we can move forward together as one, and we can accomplish things for the Lord. Better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. So again, we need to stop thinking about all the things that we have worldly, all our worldly goods and all these things, because if we're poor but we're wise, which of course would mean that we're young, we don't have a whole lot, but we're wise, that means we have the Lord, then we have everything that we need and we'll be better off than if then there was an old king that has everything material-wise in the world, but it's foolish and doesn't know the Lord. And those that won't accept correction, that will not be admonished. Somebody that understands that they don't know it all. Say, hey, I don't know everything. I don't have it all figured out. Sometimes I may make a mistake, or, I may be trying to do the best I can, and I think that I was right on this, but if somebody comes to you out of love and corrects you, and it's like, hey, you're kind of on the right track with this, but you're just a little bit off, and you accept that correction. And when somebody comes to you in love, then we can move forward together. Because anybody that stand in front of you and tell you they got it all figured out and they know it all, they probably know less than anybody else. Because the deeper you get into this word, the more you know that you can never master this word. You can never master God. He's our creator. He's our father. Anybody that says I got it all figured out, they're a liar. Because there's no way to know it all. There's too much wisdom. There's too much power there. There's too much. But, so we all have to understand to keep ourselves humble. And be like that child that says, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can here, but if you know a better way to do what I'm doing, then, teach me, show me, and go to the elders and ones that have proved themselves in the Lord and that are walking in the right direction and learn from them, and then teach the next generation. That's what we need to do. If we don't pass this on to our children, they're not going to know the Lord. Then our grandchildren won't know the Lord. And we have to keep doing that. Pass this information along and have our kids to be teachable and to teach them that they're never going to know it all and that they need help, and to help other people. That's what we're supposed to do. Love each other, work together, help each other make it. For out of prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. So that old foolish king that won't take admonishment, he's basically trapped in a prison of his own self because he thinks he knows it all. He doesn't need help. He's not going to help take the advice of others. He's just going to not be corrected. If he makes a bad choice, he just rides it under the ground because, well, I'm the king. I said it, so it may be wrong, but that's the way we're going to do it because I'm not going to admit that, whatever it may be. Well, the subjects become poor and broken and the kingdom falls apart. We have to understand that we're going to make mistakes. And we can learn from those things and mature and grow. Just like when we're little kids, we don't know things. And, sometimes we listen to our parents, sometimes we don't. We're better off when we do listen to them, just like our spiritual walk. When God tells us to do something and, Daniel wants to do it his way, I trip up and fall on my face. And I have to learn and have to mature and say, you know what? If I'd have done that the way you told me to, God, it probably would have worked out just fine. And he said, yeah, I know that. Do you know that now? Yes. Until the next time I trip over myself. Hopefully you get to that point to where you grow up and mature enough that you stop doing that. Because that's what he's wanting to do. He's wanting us to get us to that point to where we just fully surrender ourselves and be fully obedient to him. And that's the point we need to get to. Christ was our example. And he was a perfect example because he was obedient even unto death and then beyond because, he rose again. And he's completely obedient. And you look throughout the whole Word and in all the New Testament, the stories of Christ, what was he always doing? He was constantly praying. And then every time there was a struggle, it came to him, a temptation, they railed against him, they brought accusations against him. What did he do? He said, thus saith the Word, the Father has said. The Father told me, the Word says. So what does that mean? Well, it means he obviously was a Bible-studied man. He studied this Word. He knew this Word. He was this Word in living flesh and blood. So of course he knew the Word. And so he always come back with the Word. So what did he do? That means we need to study this Word. We need to put it in our hearts. We need to put it in our minds. And we need to pray. Because he was always praying. And he was always being obedient. The Father told me to do this. I'm about my Father's business. That's all that he said to everybody. He told them the truth, told them the Word. And then he was obedient to the Father. That's the example that we need to do. Verse 15. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with the second child that shall stand up in his stead. There is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So he's saying, this unwise, foolish king here, that he built up all these things, and maybe we do this, whatever it may be. If we don't leave a legacy of God in our children, and we leave that legacy of God in our life, it's all vexation, it's all vanity. None of that matters. And if we live to this world, we're not gonna be the full potential of what God created us to be and who we were supposed to be in Him. And it's going to fall short, and it's not going to matter because it's all going to go away. All these earthly, fleshly things and material things, none of that's going to matter. It's all going to be left to somebody else until the last generation comes, and then it's all going to burn up and melt away. This word will stand when the world's burning. The word's going to stand forever. So the spiritual things that we do, the spiritual life, legacy that we leave behind, that's what's going to matter. That's what's going to be important. What we taught our children, how we treated our brothers and sisters and those people around us and all the things that we've done, and that we obeyed the Lord and we obeyed Him and we did all the things that we could do for Him while we were here. That's the example that Christ gave to us, and that's what we're supposed to follow. Moving on, Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. All right, so we need to remember when we come into this house, that we're coming into the presence of God, and we need to humble ourselves down to Him. And it says we need to be ready to hear. We need to be able to listen to what the Spirit tells us and what the Spirit moves upon us to do and all these things. We need to honor Him. And it says then to give sacrifice to fools. That means don't make a show of yourself. Don't come in here, thinking that, you got it figured out, that you're better than everybody else and all these kind of things and make a show out of this. You have to humble yourself down and understand who you're coming into the presence of when you come to His house. That this is our great Father that's in heaven, and that we're supposed to serve Him and we're His children, and He's the boss, not us. And we need to make sure that we're being true to Him and all the actions that we do. When we sing, when we pray, when we play an instrument, we teach, we preach, we raise our hands, whatever it is that we do, we need to make sure that we're doing it for His honor and glory, not of ourselves. Because you'll make a fool out of yourself if you're doing it for you or to make a show. And it says that that's evil, to come into His house and to mock Him, because that's what you would be doing. If you do something in yourself and you do something to bring yourself glory or honor, to make yourself look good, that's evil. That's mocking God, and we cannot do that in His house. That's pure evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. So, don't come in here, don't get caught up in a moment and make a promise or say something that, I'm going to do this for God or yeah, God, I'll do this or whatever it may be, unless you intend to do that. And you're going to put everything that you have into that. So He says, don't speak things before you've thought it through, you prayed it through, before you know for sure He's intended for you to do those things. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is shown by multitude of words. So don't get caught up and run your mouth and say this and that and whatever it may be and try to build yourself up again. This is not about us. It's about Him. It's always got to be lifting up Jesus Christ, that He can lift us up and take us to the Father. It cannot be about us. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for He hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. So this is saying here, if you're going to make a vow with God, you're going to say, all right, I'm going to do this for you. You're going to make that vow, you're going to make that promise and say you're going to do it. It's better to keep your mouth shut and not do it than to say you will and then not follow through. And so it says that there's no pleasure in that it's a very foolish thing. And to think that you're going to go into a vow with God knowing you're not going to do it, that's a very vain and evil and mocking thing, and it's best not to do that. You'll suffer greatly for that, and if you mock Him, you could be destroyed, and it's just don't play games with your soul. If you're going to make a vow to God, you're going to make sure that you're going to do everything you can to make sure that happens. Because He's counting on us when He calls us out to be obedient. Obedience is better than sacrifice. So, if you're sure that's what you're supposed to do and that you're going to follow through with that, then that's fine. Go ahead and do that. But if not, don't do those things. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error, wherefore God should be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands. So, don't just say, well, I'll say this now, and then I'll back up later and be like, oh, I misunderstood, or I misspoke, or you didn't understand what I said. Don't let your fleshly nature, write those checks that, your actions and your soul's not going to be able to cash. If you make that vow, make sure that you're going to do everything you can to make that, because you're not going to be able to back out of it once you've said that with God. He signs everything in blood. Ask Jesus about that. He was completely serious when he wanted to save our souls, that he sent Jesus down here. And I promise you, more than anything, Jesus was completely serious. Because if you don't believe that, look at what he suffered through, how they beat him and mocked him and jerked his beard out of his face, and the way they abused him and spit on him, and then they put him on that cross after all that suffering. He was completely serious, and he sealed his covenant in blood. We need to make sure we do the same thing with God. This is not something to play with. He's not a fairy tale. He's not a story. He's a living and breathing God, and he's our Father. And he does love us, and he will take care of us. But he also gets angry, and he has wrath when we're disobedient and rebellious. And so he's not to play with. We need to be serious when we come before God, because it has eternal consequences. For in the multitude of dreams and many worlds there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God. Exactly. We have to fear the Lord. That is the beginning of all wisdom and understanding. We have to understand that he is to be feared. We have to give him reverence. We have to worship and praise him and give him honor and glory, because, he holds everything we have. He holds our very breath that we have in our bodies in his hand. And we're disobedient, we're rebellious, and we're fighting against his church, against his people, against his work. He can take us out. He is a loving and forgiving God, but he will not be mocked. We do not need to play games with the Father. If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they are. So again, we're going to see these things. There's going to be the oppression of the poor. There's violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province. We see this now. You turn the news on and you see all the things going on right now. People are doing things that know they're wrong, and people are walking by and seeing it, knowing it's wrong, and they're not doing anything about it. We see that all the time now. Sin is prideful. It's out there. It's they're not trying to hide it anymore. It's just walking around in open daylight, and nobody's ashamed of anything anymore. We're living in this time. This word is still relevant. It may be 3,000, 4,000 years old, however it may be, but it's still alive and breathing. It's alive, and it's just as relevant as it was when it was written as it is today. We see this going on now, and God does not like this, as he disapproves of this. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. This world's going to serve its own purpose. It's going to serve its master. Satan's out here roaming around trying to destroy everything, and the world and the fleshly things are going to do the work of their master. That's why we have to be separate from this. We have to be a peculiar people, separated. We're going to look different. We're going to talk different. We're going to act different. We're going to have different attitude, because we have that hope in God. We have to be serving our master. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. You love money, you love power. You're never ever going to get enough of it, because it's not going to fill that void. There's nothing going to fill that except for Christ. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them, and what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The more you have, the more people is going to be surround you. They're going to be your best friends. They're going to try to live off you and do all these kinds of things. And these rich people have found that out. Their circle of friends may blow up and be huge once they're popular, they're powerful, they got money. But, let that money dry up and see what happens then. People are just like leeches. They'll leech off you all they can, and that fame, that power, that money, and that's not going to satisfy you. It's not going to satisfy them. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. If a man works for a living, a woman works for a living, they take care of their family, do the best they can go home at night serving the Lord and sleep well. And it's saying here, those that are serving the flesh, those that are serving the God of money and power and all those things that are caught up in that abundance and rich, They can't sleep well at night because they're not satisfied. They don't have that peace. They don't have that what they're searching for again. You're not going to find it in power. You're not going to find it in money. There's nothing out there that's going to fill that void except for God. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. Again, when you love money, you hoard money, you're just hurting yourself again. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. So again, like money, whatever it is, power, all that stuff, it's all vanity. You may pass it on to your children, but you could ruin your children with that. If you teach them that that's all life's about, is making that next dollar and whatever it may be, and getting that next rung up that ladder, that next position, that next title, whatever it may be, you're going to destroy them. You're going to leave your kids empty-handed because they don't have nothing. If all you leave your children is money and power, you've not left them a thing. If all you leave them is a love for the Lord, you give them everything they've ever needed. As he hath came forth of his mother's womb naked, shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. Again, all the worldly things we possess, we're not going to take nothing with us. The only thing we can take with us is Jesus Christ. And so that blood has to be applied to our lives. Their spiritual things are the only things we're going to leave here with. We came into this world with nothing, and we're going to leave with nothing. As far as this world's concerned, the spiritual things are all that matters. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? So all these things you build up and amass, and all these towers and buildings and barns and fill them up, whatever it may be, it's like it's all going to go. And when you pass, it's all going to pass to somebody else. You can't take it with you. You might as well just be throwing it up into the wind. All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with sickness. Again, in the dark, what does that mean? That means without the light. That means without the Lord. So, if you amass all these things, these worldly things, they don't matter. It's all spiritual. You have to have the Lord. Behold that which I have seen. It is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy what you got. If you go out here and work, you should enjoy the harvest for the work that you put out. But you thank God for it. You praise him for it. You don't say, look what I've done. You look what the Lord's blessed me with. He gave me health. He gave me this ability to work this job, to do these things and provide for my family. You can have things. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to be poor, but you have to be spiritually rich. You have to understand that what you do have, you give the credit to God. You give him the glory for those things. And then you don't hoard those things. If you have a neighbor that's lacking and you have extra, you would help that person because, you would love them and share and do these things. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. So we should celebrate the things that he has gave us, and the abilities he's gave us, and the strength to work and to do, and all that kind of stuff. Be happy about what he's gave us. Praise him for that. Glory for him. That you have a roof over your head. That you have a family together at that table to eat with. Whatever it may be. You can enjoy what you work for, but just remember it's a gift of God. Give him the praise and glory first before yourself, or before those things. And understand that all these things are things. You can replace a home. You can replace a car. You can replace whatever else may be, but what the blessings God's gave you in him, you cannot replace. The people in your life, your family, your children, those things, hang on to those. Those are more important. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. So again, we don't need to worry about all the things we amass, all these worldly things, all the riches of this world. It's the spiritual things. It's that joy God gives us, that look in our children's eyes, and the look in your spouse's eyes, all those things, that love that you have there, that peace and joy that you share the Lord with your family. That's the most important things. He is the most important thing. We have to keep Christ foremost in all things and be obedient, lift Him up, and He'll lift us up to God. That's the important things, and that's where we're going to find that peace and joy in this life. It's not anything of this world, but it's all the spiritual things again. So we'll close there this morning. But again, we got to keep God first. And if we keep Him first and keep Him in the center of everything, everything will be all right. But when we push Him off to the side, or we put ourselves in the middle, or put ourselves first, that's when we fail.